Thank you and welcome. It's a really a great privilege for me personally and I think for all of us to welcome Professor Ramakrishnan. In service, he's very, very much my senior. In fact, by the time I went to Government of India, he had already left Government of India, retired and moved on to international multilateral organizations. But I would say my first knowledge about his work was when we looked at the draft of the Calcutta Metropolitan Development Authority, which he was putting together in the form of legislation, architecture, planning permissions, planning institutions, etc. in Calcutta. And this became a kind of a model for several cities in India, closely followed in Chennai by the MMDA, Madras Metropolitan Act, followed by the Bangalore Act, and subsequently several cities adopted this as a principle. And we are talking actually of the early 70s. And at that time, the concept of looking beyond the idea of a municipality into a metropolitan agglomeration, more or less as a city governance measure, and the requirements of that governance was very, very new thought at that time. And I would say that he is the single person who has introduced this idea into India. And his subsequent responsibilities as positions have enabled him to enlarge this idea, to bring it into a focus in several cities in India. When he was at the Ministry of Urban Development in the center, he crafted the constitutional amendments which have given the urban local bodies their delegated powers of governance, of planning, as well as financial autonomy. And for me, it's a great privilege and honor to be here at the same table as him. Even after retirement, he has been continuously working in the area of his love and interests. And currently, with the Center of Policy Research, he chairs the CPR in Delhi. And at the Center of Policy Research, he's working on this particular topic, which is the topic of today's discussion, and that is megacity regions in South Asia, growth and governance. And during lunch, he was telling us that the concept is to look beyond limited concepts of municipalities, corporations, city governance structures, into the requirements of the region, or more or less the entire region that the city is expected to serve, is expected to be served by, and what are the requirements of governance and administration, and rules and institutions that such a group would require. So without further ado, it's my great pleasure to invite Professor Ramakrishnan to share his thoughts with us.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Narayan. Well, I'm very grateful to all of you for sparing your afternoon. When Dr. Narayan said that this whole metropolitan idea is something which I have to bear my part of responsibility. I find for the past several years, I've been going around the country and also sitting in the Center for Policy Research. And looking back on my 40 years experience, I find that from time to time, I allow myself to do some very, very rash things in the hope that that's what is needed. And then I spend a few years thereafter explaining why I did that. So, in a way, it's a question of continuous introspection. And you will have to bear with me when I go through this kind of a process each time when I meet a group, especially a distinguished scholarly academic group such as the one before me. So some of this may sound intensely personal and therefore not as objective as it should be. I realize also that the city region itself is a concept that is not very well established. In some of the other countries, they may have a slightly better record, but this is a topic which permits a great deal of ambivalence and also quite a bit of going back and forth on what are the issues and what should one do about them. The reason for this particular presentation is for the past year or so, we in the CPR have been engaged in a study of 5 city regions. That's Bombay and Hyderabad and Bangalore and Chennai and Calcutta. I'm deliberately using the old names and not Bengaluru and Mumbai because these are the cities by their names that I know them. And we have also been trying to take a look at our neighbors, whether it's Bangladesh or Pakistan, and what's been happening. These megacities, you can take any definition you want. You can call them multi-municipal, you can call them city regions, you can call them 4 million plus, 5 million plus, going on to be 10 million, etc., etc. Whatever it is, they are mega. They are multiple jurisdictions, and there is no escape from that. These are the kind of beasts with whom we have not been terribly familiar. Certainly not, in the subcontinent. Much of this is recent, 30 years ago at the best, or 40 years. And we really do not know how to deal with them. The only construct with which we have been familiar is the municipal construct. And the municipal construct is largely of a British vintage, going back to 1920s and so on and so forth. So in a way, we are wrestling with a new set of problems, and we are not entirely sure what we have done in the recent past or what we are trying to do now are really appropriate. So in a way, I am using these meetings as an opportunity to try and get some clarity, some counterpoints to what we are currently doing. One of the things which I'm sure people in Singapore will realize more easily than others is that urbanization is a South Asian reality. So you have broadly, the figures here, and the Indian census. By the way, the Indian census does not recognize the word mega. It does recognize the million-plus city, and we have 53 of them, and Pakistan has 7, Bangladesh has 3. Nepal, depending on what definition you use, the whole valley of Kathmandu, and in that case you have 1. So that is In the case of India, in 2001, we had 35 of these cities which are more than 1 million. In 2011, the number has gone up to 53, as you can see. And the total, out of these 53, in the past 10 years, these are some of the new cities that have been added to the list. And it may come as a bit of a news to you that this place, Malappuram in Kerala, its growth rate is 896%. This is mainly because of reclassification. The Indian census, which is a time-honored census for a long time, it's a 100% head count census, and no head count census in the world is accepted without questioning by statisticians and scholars. Every head count census is held guilty of either undercounting or overcounting. And so the Indian census is also not entirely free of criticism. But the Indian census uses a particular criteria for defining an urban place, that it has to be a settlement of about 5,000 people, the density should be 400 persons per square kilometer, and then 75% of the male working population should be engaged in non-agricultural pursuits. So if these criteria simultaneously are met, then the census says the place qualifies to be urban. So what really happens is, irrespective of the population of that settlement, it is the application of that criteria which makes places to be declared as census. And so in a place like Malappuram, you will find that there are a lot of settlements in the periphery or adjoining the core city within what is considered as an agglomeration, which becomes census, and therefore the growth rate shoots up. Now, we should also note that apart from the census towns, some towns are called towns by the government. It may be an industrial township, it may be a company township. Now, those towns may not meet the census criteria, but nevertheless, they have to be counted. So you have something called statutory towns, and you have something called census towns. So you do get a funny paradox here. All towns, and all these towns need not necessarily have municipalities. So you do have a situation where all urban areas need not be municipal, and all municipal areas need not be urban. Now, this itself is a fairly interesting point for statisticians and demographers to start arguing about. Taking these megacities, these are the megacities. I will not be saying much in the case of Delhi because it is pretty well known. Maybe it will come out in questions and answers. But these are broadly the cities which have some shared characteristics. If you take Bombay, you'll find that there are 7 municipal corporations and 13 municipalities. And if you take the metropolitan region as a whole, you are talking about a 4,400 square kilometer area. The concept of Bombay as a metropolitan area is more or less understood by the people for the simple reason that right from British days you had those 2 long commuter lines, Central and Western Railway, and a whole generation or 2 or 3 generations of people are used to getting up very early in the morning and catching the suburban train and going into Bombay. So this is a metropolitan area. People generally know that. Now you'll find that in terms of 2001-2011, the population, the overall population has really gone up, to about, the region as a whole is about 22 million. It's quite a sizable number. Oftentimes, people say the core city itself is losing population. This is not really true. You will find in the case of Calcutta, the Calcutta core city, there is a slight decline in absolute numbers. But in the rest of the metropolitan area, growth is taking place, densification is also taking place. So what this really tells you is that if you take a view, a metropolitan view, you find that it is not a question of an urbanization slowing down. It is really a question of the agglomeration densifying itself in a broad sense and population increase taking place, in a broad sense. So each of these areas, are fairly sizable. So in the case of Bangalore, apart from the fact that the Bangalore Municipal Corporation itself, has had expanded limits, the metropolitan region is about 8,000 square kilometers. And in the case of Chennai, it is roughly about 1,200 square kilometers. In the case of Hyderabad, for instance, the municipal corporation itself is an area of about 800 is about square kilometers 878. For the metropolitan region, it's about 7,000 square kilometers. So one of the things that is happening is, why are these metropolitan areas getting so big? What is there to show about? Take, for example, the demographic primacy. The metropolitan region's population to the state's total population and the country's urban population is quite significant. And you'll find that in terms of absolute numbers and also as percentage, it is quite high. Therefore, there is a demographic primacy here. In the case of Delhi, if you take the national capital region, the national capital region is a 4-state region. You will find that it's a very, very large area, and you're talking about a 33,000 square kilometer area, and the population all around, has been increasing. I'll come back to this later on. One of the concepts was that by taking the national capital region, part of the problems of Delhi, can find a solution. But what's been happening is the population of Delhi, as also the other areas, have been growing up. If you take Dhaka, for example, you'll find that Dhaka has 14% of Bangladesh's total urban population, and you also find that the metropolitan area is close to about 1,600 square kilometers. This is true to some extent in the case of Karachi as well. And so there is a demographic primacy once again, in these two cases as well. The economic primacy is well understood in whichever way, you want to express that in terms of GDP or anything else that you want to use. They are significant economic engines. And of late you find that each of these metropolitan city regions are standing out for something that is quite prominent, as in the case of Bangalore for IT, Chennai in the case of automobiles, and Hyderabad also to some extent for IT and ITES. So the economic primacy is there. The demographic primacy, the economic primacy. And the global visibility, whether these cities are consciously trying to promote themselves or otherwise, they are being watched, they are being looked at for a whole variety of reasons, and there are scholars, who are looking at this all the time, whatever may be the criteria, of their analysis and comparisons. And you find that all these cities are featured in the Economist list of 120 odd cities. So whether we like it or not, this global attention is becoming an important aspect of the South Asian cities. Their scores may not be very high, but they do figure in the list. In other words, they are being watched at all the time, and in so far as there is a desire on the part of the business, on the part of the political people, on the part of the citizens themselves, that they do have to count in world ranking. These particular figures keep popping up, whatever the consequences. In each of these cities, you have multiple organizational arrangements. Particularly in regard to spatial planning, you find that there are multiple arrangements. Because there is a metropolitan authority, it does not mean that they are sovereign in that particular jurisdiction. So a variety of agencies exist. In many cases, the urban local bodies exercise some planning powers. In some cases, specific settlements, whether they are industrial settlements or new towns, they exercise. For example, Mumbai, which has a fairly reasonable structure for planning purposes, you have the Metropolitan Region Development Authority, but you also have the Bombay Municipal Corporation with its planning powers. For the new town of Navi Mumbai, you have a separate organization which has these planning powers. And in a way, this is the position with regard to Calcutta also. And in the case of Chennai, the Chennai Metropolitan Development Authority may be wielding more powers compared to others. In the case of Bangalore, it is quite a complicated situation because you have a BDA and a BMRDA, and there are also local planning areas and local planning authorities. In Hyderabad, there is this Hyderabad Metropolitan Development Authority, which is responsible, for overall planning. But over a period of past 6-7 years, somehow this planning jurisdiction appears to have been diluted quite a bit, and currently the Metropolitan Authority is focusing more on the new areas. You have multiple sector-specific institutions, and this is just a sample. I mean, it can be repeated for other functions as well. You have multiple laws, and at any given time, it does become a major exercise. Of course, every law, every new law has one particular clause which says, notwithstanding any other law for the time being, this law will provide. Now, when you write that kind of a provision in all laws, no laws really provide. And so what the lawyers would call as a non obstante clause, it really does not apply. So we do have some problems. The multiple jurisdictions, I already mentioned. You have municipal corporations, municipalities, town panchayats, census towns, villages. And there are multiple jurisdictions. Would life be simpler if there were lesser number of such municipal entities? One does not know. But the reality is that there are a number of such bodies. If you look at the governance situation again, take for example, in the case of Delhi. Delhi is both a national territory, it's a capital territory presided over by the Lieutenant Governor as an appointee of the Government of India. You have a separate state, the state of Delhi with the Chief Minister. You have corporations. Until a few weeks ago, we had one corporation that became three, and you have three corporations, the New Delhi Municipal Committee plus a cantonment. You have these various states. In the case of Dhaka, the Dhaka City Corporation, again, until a couple of years ago was one. Recently it was split into two. You have other municipalities. In the case of Karachi, it's very interesting. There was a Karachi Metropolitan Corporation. During Parvez Musharraf's time, the National Reconstruction Bureau set up a very special arrangement making Karachi into a Karachi district administration, almost giving it a city-state kind of powers. And the mayor, the Nazim of the Karachi district government was to be elected by an electoral college consisting of a number of local bodies. That lasted for about 5 years. In 2010, that was taken out. The old Sin, the Local Government Act, was revived, and we are back to a metropolitan corporation. So there have been some halting steps to metropolitan governance. As I said, in the case of Dhaka, you have a capital development authority which is called Raju, which has been in existence since 1987. In the case of Karachi, you can say the Improvement Trust becomes a development authority, and the development authority gets merged into the Karachi Metropolitan Corporation, and then you have these various changes taking place. If some kind of a storyline can be drawn, not that I am choosing Pakistan specially, but in the case of Pakistan, at least scholars have identified that the autonomy exercised by local governments is in some inverse ratio as far as the regime at the national level is concerned. Whenever there is an authoritarian regime, local government autonomy appears to do better. Whenever there is an elected government at the national level, the local government's autonomy appears to be diluted. So there are these halting steps that are being taken from time to time towards metropolitanization and taking a metropolitan view of decision making. In some cases, they try to expand the core city. Bangalore has been expanded, Chennai has been expanded, Hyderabad has been expanded, Kolkata marginally, but not in the case of Mumbai. In some cases, the metropolitan region itself is thought to be created. A very interesting question is, what is the rationale, what is the criteria for defining or changing the metropolitan delineation? Even in the case of Chennai, currently there is a debate going on as to whether the metropolitan area is 1,200 square kilometers as now, or should it be expanded to 8,000. There are various theories about this, various surmises, some of them quite plausible, as to why these metropolitan areas are sought to be enlarged. The Delhi National Capital Region Board is a rather innovative kind of an experiment which was talked about in the late 1950s because it was felt that Delhi's problems will have to be solved within the region. And so, a special act of the Parliament, which was after obtaining the consent of the participating states, was enacted, and therefore you have a National Capital Region Planning Board with the Union Minister and the Chief Ministers and various other nominees. This particular example of a multi-state, multi-territorial kind of a board has not been repeated elsewhere. In some respects, the Region Planning Board has been successful. In many respects, it has not been successful. You do have a possible list of functions of this NCR Planning Board, and this is, fortunately, the judiciary has also held that as far as conflicts of jurisdiction are concerned in matters of planning, the Planning Board NCR provides. This is an extremely important change that has come about in recent years. Some of you may or may not be aware that in India, the Constitution did specify that every 10 years, electoral constituencies should be adjusted in keeping with population changes. And as a result of that, in 1951, 1961, 1971, we did delimitation. But thereafter, the southern states of Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Andhra, and Kerala said, we are doing a reasonably good job in population planning, and so if this formula is applied, we will lose our population in comparison and therefore lose our seats in the parliament, and this is no way to treat us. And so Mrs. Indira Gandhi said, all right, fear not, we will freeze delimitation. And delimitation was frozen till 2001. As a result of that, from 1971 till 2001, the constituencies remained frozen. Parliamentary constituencies as well as assembly constituencies. The government also went to the extent of saying that this is an inducement for population planning. Though some of us argued that the people of India do not follow reproduction procedures depending on election arrangements. Notwithstanding that, the freeze went on till 2001, and later on a delimitation commission came into existence a few years ago, and today you find that urban constituencies are regaining some of their representation. So as a result of that, if you look at this, the Mumbai metropolitan region has as many as 10 out of 48 MPs in Maharashtra and 60 out of 288 MLAs. 23% of Maharashtra's electorate is in the Mumbai region. So it is in Kolkata, 17% in Chennai, 18% in Bangalore, and 12%, which means that these metropolitan regions are a political reality with such a big share of your electorate and with so many members of parliament and so many MLAs, and I'm not giving you the count of the municipal corporators, there are a large number of elected representatives, and they are all operating in the same territorial space without any clear demarcation of what their responsibilities are. This therefore becomes an extremely important factor. And the same thing is true in regard to the Delhi, Dhaka and Karachi as well. The political prominence, whether you like it or not. So the question is, there is always this particular adjustment to what extent national political leadership can come to terms with the local political leadership in whichever way you look at it. So very quickly, all decisions come to that. Now, Dr. Narayan referred to this constitutional amendment. The amended constitution provides for something called a metropolitan planning committee for all cities which have more than 1 million people. It is left to the state government to decide on their composition, though broad principles are given here. The Constitution itself provides some interesting terms of reference, and this is the only provision in the Constitution which recognizes a metropolitan region, which recognizes its multi-jurisdictional character, which recognizes planning and coordination as an important metropolitan task, and which therefore lists down these important requirements. But notwithstanding this, there are no takers. So in the case of Kolkata, a metropolitan planning committee came into existence 5 years after the amendment was brought in, and the metropolitan planning committee existed twice, and now after the most recent changes that have taken place in the state of West Bengal, it has not been reconstituted. In Mumbai, it has been brought into existence very recently. It is not functioning. Bangalore, Chennai, Hyderabad, this constitutional provision has not been implemented at all. The question is, why is this so? Some possible problems are, it could well be that this Metropolitan Planning Committee stipulates that 2/3 of the members of the Metropolitan Committee should be drawn from local level councillors. The role of the core city mayor is not very clear. There is a limited perception of metropolitan level problems by local body members. And the parastatals of the state appear to be somewhat outside. And there is a continued reluctance and resistance from the existing parastatal organizations. So, one of the important issues here is that in spite of the demographic primacy, economic primacy, political primacy, and the serious institutional problems faced by these metropolitan areas, why is it that what has been suggested has no takers? Broadly speaking, this is a problem which some other countries have tried to deal with, in their own way. You have your city government, city-state governments in China. You have an elected two-tier government as in London or Tokyo, and you have a territorial polycentrism as in North America or South America, and you also have interlocal cooperation arrangements as in New York or Mexico. Now, somehow, in India and in the South Asian situation, the arrangements that are in possession or that are sought to be created or argued about, they appear to defy any typology. Some common problems seem to be that there is a very strong state dominance. The provincial governments or the state governments somehow seem to feel that it is their voice that should prevail. There is an overriding state political agenda. There is a fear of elected mayors. There is certainly a very large number of elected representatives, but they do not necessarily have a metropolitan focus. So the question arises whether city regions should be political entities at all. Are there alternatives and models to look for? Is there an interest in these issues? Is there an audience? I do want to add one particular point when I talk about strong state dominance. We have been looking at the results of provincial elections, state assembly elections, and also the results of the elections in the respective main cities. We find, let us take one example in the case of Tamil Nadu. In the previous assembly, the DMK took the majority of seats and ADMK was down below. In the most recent elections, the ADMK more or less substituted DMK and DMK has gone down. The same results are repeated in the case of Chennai Corporation. The same is the situation with regard to Kolkata. In other words, whatever is a political agenda of the state appears to prevail over the local authority as well. Does it mean that the local authority as such does not have an opportunity to shape an agenda of its own? Will there continue to be dependencies of the higher level of government? And if that is the position, how do we deal with the new challenges? I'm not getting into that because some of that is very familiar to all of you, and I'm sure you will have a number of queries about that. Considering the problems of the need to keep these economic engines going, for which a whole variety of activities, a whole variety of interventions are needed, whose should this responsibility be in very large countries like India? Should the national government be expected to orchestrate the whole thing? Should the state governments take it as their responsibility? Is there any political, economic, and civic space available for these metropolitan cities and the various constituent municipalities which comprise them? And is there an audience at all for talking about these issues and for raising a certain level of awareness? Because right now, the position appears to be that the demand side does not seem to be very manifest. And such responses as have been provided so far appear to be more a supply side response. Insofar as I personally had a hand in the supply side response, I do consider, perhaps some of my colleagues and myself, what we did in the best of intentions was not appropriate. That could well be the reason. But nevertheless, I feel that these are important questions about which we need to think about, talk about, argue about, and see what lies ahead. Thank you.